Alright, so on my YouTube feed, there was this video recommended by this Amila person. She's right, Black American culture is dying. Ghetto black people are to blame. But are they really to blame? Anyway, I'll pop in the video and take it from there.
Let's react.
Here is my little 2 cents that nobody asked for. I am sick of seeing Black Americans in the media, on social media, in the news, doing crime, walking around next to naked, the women, the men perpetuating gang violence, substance abuse. The absolute worst of our community is oversaturating the media, even though they make up a small percentage of all of Black Americans. The decay of our morality within Black communities has been slowly declining over the past 20 years, and no one is talking about it, no one is saying anything about it or trying to address it. And if you do, you are often told that you're policing Black bodies. If you say Black women, stop getting on the internet and in the media, twerking, walking around with little clothes on. People tell you that you're policing bodies, policing Black bodies.
It's funny how this reactor says, which I kind of associate with black ghetto culture. But she agrees with this woman, right? And the woman with the glasses even said that twerking was part of ghetto culture. And yet, in this reaction video that's only 2 weeks old, what is this black woman doing? She's twerking. And this reactor finds it funny.
Kaya, cooking it. Kaya, cooking.
Not the twerk.
Where did twerking come from? Twerking has its roots in both African and African American dance traditions. It is often traced back to Mapiku dance can't pronounce that, so I'm not even going to try. A celebratory dance where women would shake their buttocks to the beat of a rhythmic drums. However, the term twerk and the specific dance style as it is known today emerged from the bounce music scene in New Orleans in early 1990s. The word is said to have originated from the inner city of New Orleans and was used frequently in New Orleans bounce music by rappers and DJs hosting block parties. In the context of the USA, twerking became widely recognized and accepted in the mainstream media, following performances by artists like Miley Cyrus at the MTV Music Video Awards in 2013. Okay, so that's a quick summary of twerking, or at least the origins of it. So just for reference, this reactor thinks twerking is funny, but in a video she did 7 months ago, she's agreeing with a woman who's also black that says twerking is part of ghetto culture. Fun fact, when I think of twerking, I think of ghetto culture. Anyway, let's continue with the video.
Add on to her list because I think she's going to go on. They are going to accuse you of being a white supremacist, of being whitewashed, of acting white, of being an Uncle Tom, a coon, trading in your race card, not actually being black. There is a list.
If you have trouble figuring out whether you want to vote for me or Trump, then you ain't black.
Within black culture, and she makes an astounding point when she says the black culture that we see on the internet, in media and entertainment is not indicative of all black people. I cannot stress that enough. It is a very small section of our population.
I would disagree with her on that. And why? You look at this chart. How many black people voted Democrat? 88%. Now this chart is a little old. I think Trump managed to shave like 15% off of that 88%. Now, what does this have to do with ghetto culture? Well, during the 2024 election, didn't Harris have performers literally twerking on stage? I think I have a video for that. And yes, this is a mild form of twerking, but they're still twerking. And if I'm not mistaken, there was a Democrat politician who twerked in a bikini upside down. For what? Votes. So in other words, the Democrat Party was using twerking, i.e. ghetto culture, to garner votes from the black population. So I don't think it's a tiny minority. I think ghetto culture is much larger than this woman would like to believe. And to repeat, she was literally laughing at this Kaya person when she was twerking. So whether she likes it or not, she's propping up, propagating ghetto culture. Well, let's continue with the react.
That for some reason is getting more airtime, and you could attribute that to some sort of conspiracy against black people, or it could be just general cultural decay, that our society is so sick that it wants to see these things and that it approves of these things. And yes, it is shaking your ass on the internet and twerking, the sexy reds, the Nickis, the Cardi B's of the world.
So the question is, why is the media propping up ghetto culture? Like, what's behind that?
There nonetheless. And if you try to talk about it and call it out, they say, oh, well, you're not really black, or you're a coon, or you're a traitor. And in my opinion, anybody of any color, race, creed, religion, whatever you want to call it, should be able to have this conversation, because this sort of culture not only impacts black people, it impacts everyone.
And how do white people react to ghetto culture? White flight, which is called racist.
Hours. We'll do that another day. Let's continue watching.
Your average black American is a middle class, working class, blue collar Jane and Joe. The ghetto subculture, black ghetto subculture that we see often portrayed and over inundated and oversaturating the media, those black Americans make up a tiny, tiny percentage of black Americans as a whole. But somehow they're in the media, overcompensating in the media, oversaturating the media. I know I don't just speak for myself when I say that I'm sick of seeing it, that it's gross, that it is destroying what black culture actually is. It's co-opting black culture as a whole and making it seem as though all of black culture is ghetto subculture. I'm not the only black American who takes issue with it. Because like I said, majority of black America is middle class, not in the ghettos, not out here perpetuating gang violence, promiscuity, and everything else.
And
so this black woman with the glasses, she talks about how ghetto culture is ruining black culture. And yet the Democrats, they prop up ghetto culture. Again, they literally had a whole whack of dancers twerking at a Harris rally. Maybe that's how they view African American culture.
Amazing point just made. If we go back to the culture of the 1950s and 60s, what did you see within black households? You saw two parents in the house. Not only two parents in the house, but two married parents in the house.
So what happened? I have my own opinion on what happened, but I'm gonna let her state her opinion, which is kind of odd in my opinion.
A great resource that actually elaborates on these points is a book by Tom Sowell titled Black Rednecks and White Liberals, where they actually talk about the sort of ghetto black culture that we see now, things like AAVE, African American Vernacular English, for those of you who are unaware, people who say words like ain't, y'all, that sort of ghetto black language. It actually was adopted from white people who came over to the United States, handed that language over to Southern black people. And there was a deviation in the United States between northern black people and southern black people. And when these two cultures started to mend and southern black people started moving up north, a lot of northern black Americans said, you guys can move here, that's fine, but we're gonna operate with a little bit of decorum, right? We're gonna speak normal English.
So because of white southern slang, ain't and y'all, it affected southern black people. And then the southern black people infected the northern black people? Okay.
We are going to contribute to society. We are going to get married and have two-parent households and build nuclear families. And it was actually a point of contention between northern black people and southern black people. Not all of them, of course, but there are actual writings that he references in this book where people said, hold up, you guys can come here, but we have to worry about conserving a proper culture. Now, you can blame white people for the existence and the transference of that culture into the black community.
So again, she's blaming white people for transference of culture. And again, she was talking about phrases like ain't and y'all. You know, if I grew up in a black nuclear family, I'd be deeply offended. Why? The black nuclear family survived the height of racism, 30s, 40s, 50s, and she even said 60s, and yet it was brought low by ain't and y'all, according to her. And you know what? That's her opinion. That's fine. Now I'm going to get into my opinion on why ghetto culture came around. It stems from gangs. Why do I think it stems from gangs? Well, if you listen to some of the rap music, they talk about gang mentality or rap about it. Black American gangs. African American gangs have a significant presence in the U.S., with many prominent groups such as Bloods and Crips. These gangs originated in the late 1950s and early 60s, with the Vice Lords being one of the first large African American street gangs, founded in 1958. These gangs were often a response to racial conflicts and the need for protection in urban areas. So, in the late 50s, this narrator woman talked about how the black nuclear family of the 60s. And yes, the early gangs came about to protect urban areas. But what happens if you get a rival gang? Bloods formed in Los Angeles in 1970s are known for their violent nature and rivalry with the Crips. They were initially created as a protective measure against the Crips and have since spread across the country. Bloods are associated with the color red and are still active today, with chapters existing in every state. Crips, also formed in Los Angeles in the 70s, are another major African American gang. They are known for their rivalry with the Bloods and their involvement in illegal activities such as drug trafficking, particularly crack. In the 80s, this involvement allowed them to grow in power and influence. So in the late 50s, gangs were used as a form of protection, but between the 50s to the 70s, they changed. The only thing I can think of is in this article. They were formed as a response to racial conflicts. So what happens if those conflicts no longer exist? What happened in the 60s? You had the civil rights movement, which, if I'm not mistaken, brought about desegregation, which in my opinion would reduce racial tension, so not as much conflict. And what happens to an organization that no longer has a purpose? It fades away. But what if the leaders of that organization don't want to fade away? This Blood and Crip rivalry, the Bloods were initially created as a protective measure against the Crips. So it went from protecting the community from racial conflicts to protecting the community from rival gang conflicts, in my opinion. Another word for gang is tribe. And you look back through history, what have tribes done? Well, they've warred with other tribes. And then what do they do in the community? They sing songs about past deeds, etc. Or they rap about it. And this article talks about how violent nature the rivalry is. Another word for violent, barbaric, savage. And that stuff all seeps into the culture, which creates ghetto culture. It even says in this article, gang culture has had a detrimental impact on the African American community, contributing to high rates of violence, particularly black on black crime. This violence not only harms individuals, but perpetuates a cycle of poverty and social disintegration within communities. Yeah, it divides them up among tribal lines, i.e., gang lines or affiliations. Now, to circle back to the disintegration, there's a saying with gangs, you either wind up in prison or 6 feet under. So what happens to the black family unit if the father is gone? The son, he'll look for the father figure in what? The gang. The mother, she'll look for support wherever she can find it, i.e., child support or welfare. So, in other words, she'll vote for whoever offers the most support. Gee, I wonder who that could be. And the daughters, they'll look for a father figure in who? The gangbanger. And the vicious cycle continues. And like these two women said, the media is glamorizing ghetto culture, gang culture, which makes it worse. I scratch my head and wonder why, but then I think about it. You know, if you divide a population, they're easier to control, aren't they? Because they're too busy fighting amongst themselves. So, in my opinion, that's why the mainstream media pushes ghetto culture. It's all about dividing people up and control. Well, anyway, that's it for my thoughts on this reaction video. Take care out there in Clown World.